I'm a high school teacher. I teach in the computer lab. I teach a Photoshop class. It's one of my favorite classes to teach because it's such a complex program initially. The learning curve is sharp, but I love it when my students get it. I always love that part of teaching. So I thought, let me have some fun with this. I had read an article about these guys who ran across the country. Okay. And they had their whole thing. And it was a blog. And this was in the early 2000s. So kind of was like, even though I was in the computer lab, like blogging, that was new to me. I never even know what that was.
Yeah.
But I read it. I was fascinated. Like every day I'd read their account. So I thought, would I do that? Would I run across the country if I had a chance? Because I was a runner at that point. I was coaching cross country. I ran to like 20 miles a week. I wasn't a huge runner. Every time I tried to train for a marathon, I wanted to run a marathon, I'd get hurt. So
Mm.
I said, I would never run across the country, but I have these running logs. What does it mean to go 20 miles? Well, from my house where I was living to my work in Palisades Park, New Jersey, was 20 miles. I'm like, all right, what's beyond that? And I looked at the next town, the next town. So I'm like, well, what if I put my miles on a map? I'll
Yeah.
put it up in my classroom, but I'll Photoshop myself in different pictures as if I'm actually running. So it was a way for me to improve my Photoshop skills. I had just started teaching it and I could goof on the kids, right? Because they'll look up and say, "What are you doing?" And that's exactly what it became. The
That's
kids would be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Is that me running?" They're like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I'm running to Florida." At the time, I was only going to go to Florida. Key West is the end of Route 1. Route 1 runs through Palisades Park, where I grew up and where I teach, all the way down. And my grandfather was telling me a story when, I think in the 50s, he had taken a trip to to Florida via Route 1 because the New Jersey Turnpike and 95
yeah.
wasn't complete. So I thought, okay, I'll do this virtually and just goof. So I found pictures of just like, welcome to North Carolina. And there's me in my running pose. And there'd be people waving, and my students would be like, "Where are you?" I'm like, "Oh, I met these people along the way, the nicest people. We went out to dinner." Like, I just had all these crazy stories. So eventually I wound up circumnavigating the perimeter of the United States. It was over 11,000 miles.
Wow.
Here's the I just loved goofing on the kids, and I always have a good time telling the story. The most frustrating thing, so it was September of, 2019, and one of my students, Dominic, a really great kid, he says, "Hey, Mr. Ring, you're gonna finish this thing by the time I graduate." He's a senior, he's gonna graduate in June. And I did the calculations, and I thought, "All right, if I do 100 miles a month, I got it." So that's what I planned. I said, Dominic, when I do this, said the George Washington Bridge is actually Route 1 comes over the George Washington Bridge, 3 miles or 4 miles from Palisades Park High School. If I walk the last route of this virtual run on the actual route, will you walk it with me? And I get a whole bunch of other people. And he's like, yeah, great. And then in March of 2020, COVID happens, school shut down.
Yeah.
So I was walked a lot during COVID, but I wasn't keeping track of my miles because I
Yeah.
just was. I mean, that was just a depressing time.
Oh yeah.
And about middle of July of that year, I'm like, where am I on this virtual walk thing? And I would have finished right in time for them to graduate, but I didn't even know it at the time because I was so disgusted with what was going on with
Yeah.
COVID.
Yeah.
So it was kind of this 16-year journey was kind of a letdown at the end that I couldn't do my big dramatic let's walk together from the George Washington Bridge
Oh
to
no.
Palisades Park High School. But what that taught me is just consistency. There would be days I'd be at my house, it's wintertime now, it's cold here, but I would be like, hey, let me go get another 3 or 4 miles on my journey. I
Mm.
mean, 3 or 4 miles, and that was my overriding goal through that was, hey, if this gets me out the door, that's a great deal, and it did when I was a runner. Um, what I found interesting, so I'd hurt my back in 2016 running. I'd herniated a disc, just the accumulation of all the miles,
Sure.
and I was doing trail running, which is really jarring on the body.
Mm.
So when I started walking with the idea of just let me get back in shape by walking, then I'll start running again. And once I got out walking, I'm like, hey, I really enjoy this. I'm listening to podcasts, I'm listening to music. I never did that when I ran. I'm like, this is really, I felt that my body was starting to feel better. but my
Right.
mindset felt so much better. I felt so much clearer about things. And that's when I thought, well, let me turn, lemons into lemonade as far as I'm recovering from this back injury, but let me start doing something with walking. And that's when I started my website, Walking for Health and Fitness. And I said, well, let me write a book of the same name. And the book was the book that I was looking for. Because when I look at walking books, I go to the bookstore, I'm like, there's just so much information that I thought was in the weeds, like, "Wait, page 4, why are they telling me about this when I really need to get right down to it?" So, I
Right.
wrote the book that I would have wanted to buy, and that was
I
Walking
love
for
it.
Health and Fitness.